All right, folks, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today, or good morning for those of you on the West Coast. Thank you again for joining us while folks are still logging on and getting settled, including one of our own presenters. I'm just going to do a little housekeeping. My name is Sarah Wee. Thank you for joining us. I'm the project manager here at the Center for Survivor Agency and Justice, and we're very excited to be featuring some of our innovative pilot sites and their work to enhance economic justice in their communities. Very excited to feature them. Just a few notes as we get going. We are recording this webinar, and materials, including the recording, will be available on our website under webinars category a few days after we're within 2 to 3 days. We should be able to get all materials up. Just to orient you a little bit to all of this, if you look at the lower right toolbar, you'll see an option to pull up a chat, a little cloud bubble, word bubble. Pull that up and select all participants and give us a chat, introduce yourself, engage with other participants, all of that. And you can see right there on the left toolbar, if you need to expand the window, see a little better, that gives you a couple of different options right there. And then, as always, if you need any help, whether it's a technical nature or a question that you might have, please feel free just to send it to me, to the host, Sarah, and I'll either answer the technical question right away or save some of your content questions to so that we can ask them during some designated times for discussion. So please keep me posted. If some of you are already having an issue, sometimes it can be solved by logging off and logging back in. Also, calling in is actually the best streaming version. So if you're listening on your computer, that might be one reason for some feedback or echoing that you have. But feel free to reach out if you need any help, technical or content-wise. So once again, thank you for joining us today for this webinar, Building Partnerships for Economic Justice, a report on our innovative pilot project. There are 4 different sites that will be presenting today on their work, and we're really excited to have them and to have all of you join as well. So to see, both to practice with the platform and the software, and for you all to start introducing yourself and engaging and getting to know one another, if you could please enter into the chat who you are, your name, what organization you're from, where you're located, and what your role in that organization is. I see we have folks from Texas, Iowa, some folks from right here in New York. I'm out of New York. Indiana, we've got some folks. Illinois, Minnesota. Looks like we have a really good mix of both direct service, some state level folks, some coalition folks, some national org folks. Wider opportunities for women, thank you. And some folks are also using the Q&A tool, so you can go ahead and look there too to meet some of your other colleagues. Great. So I'm just going to do a really brief introduction of who we have on the call today, and we'll introduce them a little bit more in depth right before they give their presentation. From the Texas Council on Family Violence, we have their policy manager and coordinators, Krista Delgado and Mona Moro. Thank you for joining us. From the Women's Resource Center in Scranton, Pennsylvania, we have Carol Stoner and Jody Lewis. Carol is the Economic Advocacy Director, and Jody is the Legal Director for their Barbara Hart Justice Center. We also have Jamie Andre joining us, who's the Managing Attorney for the Indiana Legal Services and the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic. and also Tammy Kennan, sorry Tammy, you're laughing right now at me. She's the director and also faculty at the University of Denver School of Law and directs the Civil Litigation Clinic, so she'll be joining us as well. And then, of course, there's myself as well as our executive director, Erica Sussman, and we'll be your moderators, facilitators, and friends here on the call. So just a few other notes before we dive in. What we're really hoping that you'll be able to take away from this today is a broader understanding of the role of partnership building in enhancing survivor safety and economic security, as well as through the strategies that you hear from the sites with very different contexts, but a lot of overlapping work and ideas, is to really feel equipped with some of these strategies and start thinking about how they could apply to your own community. And because of all of that, we're really hoping you'll be motivated to continue the discussions, figure out how it works and how all of this would apply in your own economic justice work, and then continue those discussions. So just to give you a quick overview of what we hope to accomplish today, Erica is going to take it over here in a second and give a little background both into the Center for Survivor Agency and Justice and our work, as well as how we evolved into the work with the pilot sites through our National Needs Assessment. Then each site is going to take a little time to talk about the work that they did with us during the pilot site phase, some of the lessons that they learned and accomplishments. And then we'll kind of bring out some of those promising practices and really highlight what was written in the report and talk about, at that point, how to apply it and engage you in some conversation about applying it in your own community. And we are currently in phase 2 with demonstrate site work, which includes Women's Resource Center, the Texas Council, and Indiana Legal Services, as well as Tammy from the University of Denver. So she is going to step up and give a little review of what she is doing entering into the project at a new site and talk about some next steps with all on board. And so we are going to save most of the discussion for the end, but please feel free to ask your questions at any time. We'll keep note of them and be able to bring them up at the end. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Erica. Erica, are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar and to this conversation. I'm really excited to have this chance to talk about some of the work that CSAJ has been doing in collaboration with these 4 different really interesting and sophisticated pilot and demonstration site initiatives. I know that I have learned a great deal from all of the work that they've been doing, and I suspect that you will learn a lot as well. So I want to give you a general overview before we kind of delve into the pilot site report. I'd like to give you an overview of how this fits within the broader scheme of CSAJ, one of CSAJ's national projects. So CSAJ focuses upon the intersection between domestic violence and poverty. And the work that we're talking about today really stems out of one of our national projects, which is called the Consumer Rights for Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Initiative, which is a national project that aims to enhance economic justice for survivors by building the capacity of lawyers and advocates to provide consumer and economic civil legal advocacy and to engage in systemic advocacy that will remove barriers for survivors. This work really began back in 2007 with some funding through the Office on Victims of Crime. We were lucky enough to get some money that was really targeted at encouraging partnerships between sectors that historically had been lacking in collaboration. In our instance, it was focusing on drawing connections between consumer law and the domestic violence advocacy community. And then it evolved into a technical assistance project that's been funded by OVW as a national TA provider and really serves many different types of grantees who are receiving funding through OVW, as well as others who might be in the future. Some of our key partners in this work include the following: the National Consumer Law Center, Home Free, which is based out of Oregon, the Center for Court Innovation, and I know that you're joining us today. I'm thrilled about that. Wider Opportunities for Women, also joining us on the call today, and a cadre of expert advisors that are absolutely integral to the work that we've been doing along the way, including Katie Von der Linde, Laura Russell, Karen Chapkus, and Jamie Andre. Our work really consists, on this project, consists of a few different pieces. One is that we are in the midst of creating a guidebook and a series of advocacy briefs that are focused upon consumer and other types of economic civil legal advocacy. We also produce a bunch of webinars that are focused on consumer and anti-poverty legal and advocacy practice. We also provide individualized TA, and then we also are deeply involved in work with innovative demonstration sites across the country, and that's what you'll be hearing about today. So this is kind of the broad scheme of things in terms of how we got to where we are. Back in 2013, CSAJ conducted a national needs assessment that was focused on identifying the capacities and gaps related to economic and consumer rights for survivors. We surveyed domestic violence lawyers and advocates. We also surveyed consumer and other types of anti-poverty lawyers. And we received responses on this survey from over 220 respondents across the country, from programs all over the country of different sorts. And that work served as a launching point for a lot of the work that we're going to be talking about today. I just really briefly, well, in addition to that needs assessment, we have engaged in intensive partnership building, and we also have this report that we'll be talking about today. But in terms of this needs assessment, I want to chat with you just a little bit about some of what we found, and you can actually access the needs assessment on our website, and there's some resource links at the end of this webinar today. But what we learned in general are, from this needs assessment are a few things. First, we learned that although violence against women professionals often provide many services that are related to coercive control tactics, that the majority of those are really taking place in the context of physical and emotional violence, but rarely addressing the ways in which coercion manifests as economic abuse. So, for example, applying the concept of economic coercion, to economic circumstances, such as, you know, someone being coerced to sign a financial document, for example. So, real understanding of coercive control in other context, but not as much in the economic context. Another piece that we found was that, you know, while violence against women professionals often provide economic advocacy for issues addressed through non-legal remedies, so economic advocacy focused on financial literacy and other types of non-legal advocacy, it was much less common for folks to be screening around the more technical economic legal issues. And then lastly, we found that there was a real lack of institutionalized policies to enhance economic justice. So while folks are often engaged in informal partnerships, casual meetings, et cetera, it was much less common to find institutionalized protocols, trainings, things built into the organization and community setting to ensure that economic needs were being met. And so this last piece, this need for institutional policies, really served as the starting point for the pilot work that we initiated. It was clear that we needed to think more critically about the ways in which we could encourage organizations and communities and states to really focus deliberate attention on addressing the economic needs of survivors. And so what we did was we began some work with a handful of on-the-ground sites in very diverse contexts throughout the country. All of the sites were focused upon collaborative approaches to enhance consumer and economic rights for survivors. And those are exactly the folks who are going to be talking with us today. I guess I just also want to say another piece about it, that in this first phase of the pilot initiative, we put a call out to folks to see who might be interested, and we had many people who expressed interest in doing this work. And we selected 4 different sites in the end. All of the groups had a demonstrated history of what we would describe as forward-thinking, strategic advocacy, strong leadership that would be supportive of collaborative work, and challenging but attainable project goals that were specific to their community's context, as well as a really strong dedication to building partnerships. So that is all to say that all of the sites were very strongly situated in terms of being able to take on this type of organizational and community systems change work. And so I guess I just want to re-articulate, because I think Sarah mentioned it earlier, that the pilot work that we've been doing has progressed in 2 different stages. So as you'll see on this slide, from 2012 to 2014, we worked with 4 different pilot sites: the Texas Council on Family Violence, the Women's Resource Center in Pennsylvania, the Indiana Legal Services, specifically their low-income tax clinic, as well as Catholic University's Columbus Community Legal Services Clinic. And that work is what we'll be talking about in terms of the report today. And then more recently, starting in 2015 and going to 2016, we're working with demonstration sites. And those are 3 of the same sites that we had worked with previously, so Texas Council, Women's Resource Center, and Indiana Legal Services, as well as the University of Denver Law School Civil Litigation Clinic. And we'll talk with you a little bit about some of the beginnings of that new phase of this demonstration work. Okay, so I guess the one last piece that I just want to mention is that, through the course of our work with each of these sites, we have worked with them closely, and they have worked with one another closely in assessing needs in terms of designing projects, in terms of repositioning themselves along the way as new information was gathered. CSAJ has provided intensive technical assistance and webinar training, as well as peer-to-peer assistance, and drawing upon all sorts of experts, many of whom are joining us on this call today. And so it has been a very involved process, and I am actually going to hand it over to each of the pilot sites now to talk in depth about what their experience has been so that you can get a clearer sense of things. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Krista Delgado and Mona Murrow at the Texas Council on Family Violence.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Great. Thanks, I just want to make sure. This is Krista Delgado. I'm a policy manager at the Texas Council on Family Violence. I've been with TCFV for a little over 13 years. So I've been in the policy world for a good amount of time now. Prior to that, I did direct service work at several different domestic violence and sexual assault centers, including in Indiana and South Dakota and in Texas. I'm really excited to share some of the information from what we have really gained from our partnership with the Center for Survivor Advocacy and Justice, and on our journey to becoming more savvy and really institutionalized advocates in terms of economic justice. So just to frame the setting where I'm located, again, I'm with the Texas Council on Family Violence. We are a state domestic violence coalition. So there may be folks on the call that are also calling in from state DVD coalitions or your local programs. Our particular coalition is a membership-based program. So the local family violence programs throughout the state are our members, and they are really our main constituents in addition to survivors of family violence. And so we feel that our role is to support the work that advocates are doing in Texas with survivors, and also create opportunities for greater options and freedom from violence for survivors in Texas. We did already have an existing focus and staff time dedicated to economic stability issues, but as all of you are aware, whether you're doing direct work with survivors or you're at a more policy or supportive level, there's a lot of competing demands even within the constellation of economic stability issues. So we were not incredibly sophisticated on the consumer pieces. In terms of thinking about the challenges, I always just like to say Texas is really big, and people that aren't from Texas are probably sick of hearing about how big Texas is, but it is really actually really big. And we have 254 counties in the state of Texas, and we have over 100 family violence programs. And while that's a lot of programs for one state to have, they're still not able to really meet the need across the state. Particularly, we have some extraordinarily high density urban areas, as well as some vast rural swaths of the state. So it's a big state, and it's very geographically and personally diverse. It's also diverse in terms of the systems that serve folks throughout the state. The other piece is, as I mentioned, as a challenge, is that while we had a focus on economic stability, that work is located on the policy team at the Texas Council, and so we also are responsible for all of the legislative advocacy on all issues, including securing funding for our family violence programs every legislative session. And so that also takes a lot of our time and is certainly a priority. And where the economic work has sat in terms of staffing, us staff people also do a lot of the child welfare, immigration, and health-related work. So there's just, as all of you know, lots of different types of work going on. And in terms of thinking about linking survivors to consumer legal experts that have an understanding of domestic violence and can be sensitive to those issues, there are just a limited supply of free expert legal services in the state, and I'm sure that also resonates with many folks' situations where you're at. And even when there are experts, there remain silos in the legal community. So typically, lawyers often practice family law or consumer law or housing law, and they don't really blend. And if they're a generalist, they typically don't have deep expertise, particularly around the domestic violence and consumer law pieces that we are looking for. So in terms of the turning points for this project, when we were first approached by CSAJ and started to contemplate what we wanted to do, and really decided that we wanted to have a brighter focus on consumer legal issues for survivors, just that in and of itself, that sort of commitment and directional shift helped us to really drill down in this area. Because before that, sometimes we would be involved in a webinar on survivors and credit, or we knew certain amounts of information from, say, a financial literacy curriculum that had pieces on credit, but we were not at all expert, and we also didn't have a lot of connection within the consumer legal world in Texas. So it really did help refocus us and understand what we were looking for, what we were trying to accomplish. And what we first did was take an inventory to find out and identify who the consumer legal services and where they were in Texas, and start to understand how they network. So were they a team at a legal aid, Legal Services Corporation funded organization? Were they separate little pockets of firms in a certain place? Were they part of, we didn't know before about the National Association of Consumer Law Attorneys. So we started to understand how these lawyers actually really connect and how they were grouped and dispersed throughout the state. And one of the incredible pieces through this process was we met two invaluable experts, the first being Carla Sanchez-Adams, who is an attorney with Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. And she, because of the fact that she started off as a consumer lawyer in the Valley, in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, she oftentimes provided clients that had co-occurring family violence issues. And so that really motivated Carla to learn the family law side of it, because both pieces she had to find relief for her clients in both sides. And so she really is one of the few people, particularly within a legal aid program in Texas, that has a deep level of expertise in both family violence laws and the custody, divorce, etc., child support for survivors, as well as immense knowledge around consumer issues. And she also was incredible in terms of introducing us to different networks that she was already familiar with in the state. And the other person that we identified, and that was sort of right under our nose in Austin at the University of Texas School of Law, was Angela Litwin. She's faculty at UT Law and focuses on things like bankruptcy and credit, but she actually has a research background and continues to do work around issues such as coerced debt for survivors of domestic violence. She has a paper called Battered Credit. So she's published several pieces and is currently working on research particularly focused on the experience of domestic violence and how it impacts survivors in terms of their debt load and their credit, and how they're able or not able to get out of those types of situations. Some of the other benefits that we really saw from this focus on consumer law was it gave us entree to new audiences. So we presented before the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid Shelter Advocates Conference, and while we present at that particular conference all the time, we had never focused on consumer law issues. We typically focused on child protective services or protective orders or custody issues, and this really gave us an opportunity to present in front of over 100 advocates that work in shelters in Texas on consumer legal issues right at the beginning of our project. So to get people sort of excited and just familiar and ready that TCFE was going to move in this direction. We also, with Angela Litwin from UT Law and Carlos Sanchez-Adams, had a presentation at the Poverty Law Conference in 2014. And the Poverty Law Conference is an annual event that the State Bar puts on for majority legal aid attorneys, but also anybody that takes pro bono cases for folks that don't have the money to pay for a lawyer in Texas. And so it's a large crowd, and we got to talk about the intersections between family law, family violence, and consumer law. We presented before the Housing and Consumer Law section of our state bar to introduce this work, and particularly those folks who do not typically do family law or think of themselves as family violence survivor experts or legal counsel for survivors, really starting to get them, thinking about this and let them know that they were on our list of someone to reach out to when we had a complex consumer case. We also presented on these issues at our biannual Economic Justice Summit, which again is focused on advocates for family violence from across the state of Texas. And we put on webinars for both our advocates on consumer legal issues, but also another sort of wonderful piece of this is through understanding who the other pilot sites are. We actually had a speaker that you'll hear from the Women's Resource Center speak to our executive directors via webinar about institutionalizing economic work at programs. And so one of the great pieces of this focus and our ability to drill down and network and meet and get ourselves out in front of different groups of people is that now at a minimum, advocates for domestic violence survivors in Texas recognize us as a resource on these issues. And so we're getting more calls, emails, and requests for information in regards to these issues, because it wasn't as though survivors didn't have credit or consumer legal issues in the past. It just was that advocates didn't really know who to turn to. And now we are at least able to be a hub to connect advocates and survivors with information and experts to hopefully find them some relief in their situations. We've also been able to assist Angela Litwin in her current research on these issues. And in doing that, that really is research that's going to be really helpful for several fields, but it's also going to be very helpful in a way that that it might hopefully turn policy. And that's a way where I'm really excited to see it going, where hopefully the results of this research will grab the attention of the consumer, the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the national level, and perhaps shift policy so we can have something specific for family violence survivors within that can protect them a little bit more in the current atmosphere in terms of the importance of credit. And we've also become more engaged in general consumer policy issues that aren't necessarily specific to domestic violence survivors, but certainly touch many survivors, such as payday lending issues. So we've been coordinating with the policy groups that work more on those issues specifically. Texas Appleseed is here in our state, and they do phenomenal work in terms of really understanding what the issue is and how that is hurting and affecting communities. So we've been able to learn from other groups that don't necessarily have a focus on domestic violence. So with that, I will let the Women's Resource Center present their information.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krista. And yeah, let's see if we can change control of the slides over to Carol Schoner and Jody Lewis at the Women's Resource Center in Pennsylvania.
Great, and I know this is Sarah really quick that they had to call back in, so I'm going to do a little test to see, make sure we can find them. Carol or Jody, is that you?
Hello, Sarah?
Hi.
There.
Good to have you.
Okay.
And you should have control.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jody Lewis, and I'm the legal director for the Barbara J. Hart Justice Center, which is a project of the Women's Resource Center. And with me is my colleague, Carol Schoner, who is the Economic Advocacy Director at the Women's Resource Center. So the Women's Resource Center is a community-based project. We've been around since 1976, and the Barbara J. Hart Justice Center was created in 2001 because the Women's Center recognized the need to have attorneys for support. We're a dual program, so we provide services for survivors of domestic violence and or sexual assault, and our services range. We have a hotline. We have safe housing, transitional housing, we do rental assistance, we do individual and system advocacy work, counseling, education, obviously legal representation, and do community work with training. We serve 2 counties, Lackawanna County and Susquehanna County. Susquehanna County is a rural county, and the population of both is about 240,000, excuse me. And as the slide shows, our total budget is about $2 million, and our staffing right now is about 33 staff members.
Good morning and good afternoon. This is Carol. So, in regards to opportunity for change, we became a pilot project with CSAJ, and now currently a demonstration project. In 2012, the Women's Resource Center was forced to close our safe house for a couple of reasons. Due to the critical and sudden staff turnover we experienced, and at the same time, there was a significant reduction in safe house funding. I don't think that this was only the Women's Resource Center that was experiencing this, but something that was happening across the state and I believe across the country. So at that point in time, as I said, we were forced to change the way in which we provided shelter or safe housing and start to use a hotel. At that point, it created a reduction in the number of survivors accessing safe housing, where on site we were serving anywhere from 5 to 7 women and their children on an ongoing basis. We were reduced to doing very short-term hotel stays and some extended safe house stays, but with 2 units. It also created an opportunity for us to start doing a more in-depth assessment of those who are coming into safe house or needing safe houses, where in the past we may have been housing more women who were homeless due to domestic violence versus being at risk of injury at the time that they called for safe housing. And we were also serving women who were coming into safe housing who may have been at risk at the point in which they entered, but then they had nowhere to go upon entering safe house, and so they were homeless. And we had very limited options in terms of housing. And women were staying, I'm sure many of you can relate to this too, were staying 30, 45, some months before they could actually access some kind of housing. So we started to shift our focus more to a housing first perspective and started looking at funding to provide rental assistance and just taking on the concept or the idea of we want to be able to move women as quickly as possible into more permanent housing, as that was also something that they wanted. And so we were trying to respond to that. It caused an increase in our advocacy work to avert crisis, if possible, and also it affected the way in which legal advocacy was being done, and also the way in which Jody and the attorneys at the Barbara J. Hart Justice Center were responding and doing their legal work and looking up in the ante, if you will, in terms of looking for economic legal remedies. We increased our economic advocacy and safety planning for leaving. We increased offering of women's meetings. And I think this is one of the pieces in terms of the work that has been truly successful and wonderful to participate in, actually. So we have legal meetings once a week where women can come and talk about their legal needs, which we can then also focus on the economic piece of it. We have economic and housing meetings that take once a week where women come in and focus strictly on the housing and economic issues that they are facing. We have 2 or 3, I should say, women who are strictly economic and housing advocates now. And their expertise has been growing in that area and are the ones that are facilitating that group. And we also have dinner meetings that we started doing that are once a month, where we invite somebody in from the community and they present on the resources, and we get to also, staff can also participate in those meetings. As a byproduct, this switch or this change in focus and increased survivor autonomy in our program because it reduced our role as a rulemaker. That was a very positive byproduct. And so then next, we continue to work toward providing a continuum of economic and housing options.
So when we were looking at the pilot project, we really wanted to look at how we were going to build and further expand the economic advocacy program. We really came up with 3 overarching goals in that. The first was to reevaluate the way survivors are being served in the organization. Second, to institutionalize the economic advocacy work that we were already doing. And then lastly, to engage the local community in reducing survivors' economic barriers to safety.
So our approach to building partnerships for economic justice, back at the pilot stage with Center for Survivor Agency and Justice a couple years back, we put together a core group of advocates and attorneys to start to dialogue about what we wanted to do, where we wanted to go, what was needed. And the first question we asked was, what factors keep women in poverty? And the answers ranged from debt, violence, poor credit, employment without a sustainable income. There's a whole list. And also, there was a discussion around mental illness and drug and alcohol addiction and how these particular women who were trying to manage the addiction and or the illness, how this was affecting their economic status, and in what respects did we need to assess them differently and work with them differently to manage that, to manage their finances. We asked, what are the organizational training needs? And one of the main responses was we needed to ramp up our economic abuse assessment. We also talked about finding out more about what resources are available and how to access them. And we talked about advanced training in understanding mental illness and drug and alcohol addiction and how it relates to economic options and abuse in their lives. We asked, how does the WRC then institutionalize assessment of economic abuse and needs? And again, we talked about how the implementation and use of assessment tools would be necessary, and identifying specific advocates and attorneys within our organization to develop that expertise so that others could use them for consultation, and also in the development of the tools that we needed. And we asked who partners we want to engage. And there was a long list of community partners, including Consumer Credit Counseling and Career Link and the EARN program. We also looked at, and are continuing to look at, how we want to bring in area agency on aging. We have an advocacy alliance whose primary job is to do advocacy with individuals that are managing mental illness, employment law, consumer law lawyers, and those who do related torts. United Way, our local United Way, and our housing authorities, and others. So, and then we talked about how do we include survivors in the process. So we started to schedule some meetings with identified community partners, and they would come to the Women's Resource Center, and we would go to visit their agency, with the key being there to start to build those relationships and get to know one another. We all know it's easy to pick up the phone, and when you have somebody that you know and you've talked to already, to be able to be understood and to provide the kind of advocacy, whether it be systems or individual, to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And again, we started using our meetings that we had in place. We have a morning meeting that is likened to roll call, if you will, where direct service workers come together every morning to talk about their plans for the day. And that provided an opportunity to bring in outside providers. Our dinner meetings, which we provide, like I said, once a month, where women come and we provide dinner and childcare. and we bring in a speaker, and we also invite all the staff in the organization to come and participate and learn. It really helps to minimize the we and them, if you will, between us and those we serve, which I think is, again, another very nice byproduct. And it provides a socialization factor that I think is so extremely important when survivors are trying to escape the abuse and get out of the isolation associated with the abuse. And again, we have staff meetings this month, so we would also use that as an opportunity.
So our approach also included engaging in systems advocacy initiatives and educational activities that specifically address the housing and economic needs of survivors. So part of that was purposeful system advocacy, and to be honest, some of the systems advocacy came out of individual work that we were doing with the survivor. For instance, in Pennsylvania, a lot of the boroughs had nuisance ordinances in place, which basically said a landlord would risk the revocation of his rental permit and be fined if the landlord did not evict renters when police had been called 3 times to an apartment building. And what was happening is a woman got referred into the Justice Center because she ended up getting evicted because of this ordinance, and subsequently also lost her Section 8 voucher, leaving her and her children homeless. And we ended up partnering with the ACLU, with the statewide coalition, and doing some work also with the National Housing Law Project. And the result of that got her reinstated, and then Carol and I did advocacy work with the borough that had that ordinance in place and got them to revoke it. And since then, because of litigation that the ACLU started in the state and all the work that we were doing and others were doing, the legislator has now put in law that someone cannot be penalized for calling the police and cannot be evicted for that reason. Carol also did work with the Public Housing Authority.
Yeah, there's a variety of things that we do with the public housing authorities that have been really beneficial for the individual survivors we're working with as it relates to everything from getting into subsidized housing to dealing with the appeal process. Just to speak quickly, too, though, about creating forms for survivor input and association, which we think is primary to this work. We created a Transitional Housing Advisory Council, which the membership is those who have been in our transitional housing or have received housing funds from the Women's Resource Center. We meet twice a year. They get paid to come, and they advise us on what it is that they think how we can improve our work, what we're doing well, what we could probably maybe do better. And then there's the Justice Center annual surveys.
Yeah, so we do send out a survey to all survivors that we've represented in the year. They get a survey, and we do a self-addressed envelope so they can easily get it back to us. It's confidential. It actually gets sent not to the Justice Center but to our main office. I would love to say we get more back than we do, but we do get some back, and it is helpful as far as us looking at what improvements can we make and what other things do they need that we're not, haven't identified or haven't provided for survivors.
Carol and Jody, so you guys have done unbelievable work in all of these different areas and developed pretty incredible individual and systems change opportunities. I'm taking a look at the time right now and just realizing that we probably want to hop on to the next pilot site, but I want you to hold on to some of the other comments that you've developed, because we can get into those during our discussion of the report. So I'm going to suggest that we sort of, if you have maybe one thought that you want to leave us with, and then we'll turn over to Jamie.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And I'll just
if not,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if not, we can just move on to Jamie right now, and then maybe we'll weave the rest in when we're talking more generally about some of the lessons learned.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to turn the program over to Jamie Andre, who is joining us from Indiana Legal Services, specifically in the Low-Income Taxpayer Clinic.
Thank you very much. I am Jamie Andre, and I am the director of ILS's Low-Income Taxpayer Clinic. And LITC helps low-income people solve their federal and state tax problems. And then we also do outreach and tax education that's aimed at vulnerable populations. We are located in the Bloomington branch office of a statewide legal services organization. So our organization handles the full range of civil cases, including family law, public benefits, housing, and consumer problems. I've been the LITC director since 2006, and I've actually worked at ILS as an attorney since 1979. So I've had the opportunity myself to practice family law, housing law, and other kinds of consumer law. Our LITC is a statewide project funded in part from a grant from IRS. So I want to talk a little bit about the problem that we chose to address. We knew that survivors have all kinds of legal problems, including tax problems, and that these problems are often related to abuse. Tax problems in particular frequently lead to loss of income, loss of assets, particularly financial assets, and can contribute to the inability to find jobs or housing, so they can be fairly serious. And it was our goal to increase survivors' access to representation to solve their tax problem and therefore improve economic stability. There are a range of tax problems that survivors have, and I thought I would just give you a couple of examples. Some of them are problems related to claiming dependents or the Earned Income Tax Credit. They may not be able to get a badly needed refund or may have to pay back a prior year's refund. Sometimes it's an inability to file a tax return due to abuse or owing tax from a joint return filed with an abuser. Perhaps issues related to ID theft, which could be theft by an abuser or a stranger. And we knew that Indiana Legal Services was representing a lot of survivors, particularly with family law, but survivors weren't coming to us with their tax problems. So we felt that there had to be something that we could do to reach people. We decided on a three-prong approach for our pilot project. We tried first reaching out to lawyers who represent survivors in family law cases. And these were lawyers who were both part of our own organization and also private practitioners. And our goal was to teach them how to first recognize tax problems and then secondly, to improve the tax impact of family law decisions that were being made, and then finally to teach them how to get help from us in dealing with survivors' tax problems. The second prong was to partner with agencies to reach survivors, and then the third part was, of course, to provide representations to the survivors themselves to actually resolve their tax issues. We encountered a lot of challenges. One of them is that unless a lawyer is a tax practitioner, their eyes kind of glaze over when you say tax. Tax is frequently perceived as too complicated or boring. It can be difficult to get lawyers to even understand that low-income people have tax problems and that it, can be a really serious failing not to address these tax issues in the context of a family law case. So that was one of the challenges. How do you get people interested, and how do you make it easy for lawyers to use the information once they actually have a case? A second challenge was getting the agencies themselves to recognize tax problems and refer the survivors to us. And then finally, the biggest challenge was getting the survivors to actually come to us with their tax problems. We had several major turning points. The biggest one, I think, when we kind of sort of reached this recognition, it seemed on one hand so basic that we really couldn't believe we hadn't figured it out from the beginning, but it was the realization that solving tax problems is usually not the first priority for survivors, and that there are other issues, safety, custody of children, housing, that sort of thing, that really were more significant and were a higher priority. And so kind of a corollary to that was that you need to be able to reach people at the right time. And that included lawyers. Lawyers were more receptive when they were in the midst of an actual case. Then they really needed our help, and they had questions they wanted to ask us. Similarly, with survivors, when they were ready to take on tax problems after addressing safety, housing, you know, and other issues. And then finally, with agencies, if an agency wasn't serving survivors who were ready to address their tax problems, the agency was not likely to be referring many people to us, and we really needed to find the right partners, the right fit, specifically organizations that were helping survivors address economic issues. Some of our other sort of key takeaways were that systemic changes are very important, and these included things like working with IRS to improve forms that survivors would be using to request innocent spouse relief, improving IRS procedures when dealing with domestic violence issues and when dealing with survivors themselves. And then finally, a big sort of recognition for us was that trust had to be earned. Just because we were announcing that we had tax expertise and we were here to help didn't actually mean that the people we wanted to reach were actually going to trust us. And so we had to figure out ways to actually earn that trust. So there were a number of lessons that we learned. One of them is that outreach really does matter, even if it doesn't lead to immediate requests for legal help. People will remember that they met you. They will remember that they heard you speak and that you did something involving tax, even if they don't remember exactly what it was. A second lesson had to do with trainings, and that more targeted trainings can help you reach people who are really ready for your services. We were doing mass trainings of lawyers, big groups where many of the attendees were just there because, you know, they were interested in the topic maybe, but what they really wanted was the continuing legal education credit. And so we felt that targeting smaller groups, local bar associations, or specific meetings of family lawyers who were more vitally interested in the topic and who came to us with questions was more effective. And also we recognized that developing a system where lawyers could reach us for immediate consultations while they were in the midst of the case might be more effective. The sort of ongoing search for new partners, particularly those who were already working to help survivors address economic issues, was something that we learned would be a more effective way to reach our targeted audience, particularly partners who were involved with providing education and job training. We also learned that it is important to survey and understand a partner's needs and capacity, and if you do that, it'll help you understand what you can expect from the partner. The other thing, maybe the most important lesson for me, was that it's a process. And you learn by going through the process, by analyzing your failures and your successes, by strategizing, by kind of continuously rethinking what you're doing and why you're doing it and whose idea it was to do it this way. And that at least for the goals that we set for ourselves, there was not really a straight path. And I think if I've learned anything, it's that it's often there is no straight path directly to the goal, but it's more circuitous. For outcomes, we did train a lot of lawyers. I would say we probably provided formal training to a total of over 500 lawyers. And in fact, lawyers did begin to call us and consult with us, including sometimes from outside the courtroom or from a mediation session. You know, what do I say to a judge who says that the parties in this divorce have to file a joint return, you know, or they would ask, is the dependent exemption worth anything to my client whose only income is SSI? And, you know, what happens with joint custody and the earned income tax credit? So we actually began to get questions from lawyers and, you know, develop the ability to project the actual financial impact of certain family law choices on, you know, how they would impact tax benefits. And then we have seen an increase in the number of survivors who contact us seeking tax help with specific tax problems. So that's been probably the most satisfying outcome so far.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing your experience with your pilot work. And we are going to hear a little bit more from the pilots in terms of their current demonstration site work, as well as hear from one of our new demonstration sites. But what I wanted to do beforehand, now that we've gotten a taste of what everyone has experienced, is to direct us toward a report that CSAJ distributed in 2014 entitled Building Partnerships for Economic Justice. The report details the activities and the lessons that were learned in the first phase of this pilot project, and it includes summaries of the site work as well as offering a handful of what we're calling promising practices. The report was co-authored by myself and Sarah Schoner, who was CSAJ's research director and is currently CSAJ's strategic advisor. And I just want to, I know Sarah's joining us today, and I want to acknowledge her really intensive work, both in the carrying out this work and also in terms of developing this resource. So I want to highlight for you some of the promising practices here and give all of us an opportunity to think a bit about applications to our own context. As we say in the report, you know, case studies are not always applicable in other settings, but they do have the potential to offer some really valuable insight into the processes of programs and some information about some general promising practices that might provide some guidance to folks in other communities and in other contexts. So I want to suggest that we kind of play around with that a little bit. So first of all, the first principle that we present or highlight in the book is the idea that well, actually the first two principles are around process. And the first being that it's important to gather information and partners before developing solutions. So an example of this, and pilot folks, feel free to chime in if it feels relevant to you, but in the book we talk about how Indiana Legal Services had sort of a shift in consciousness at one point around this idea of offering up services, saying this is what we have to offer, moving from that kind of mindset to instead asking more questions of potential partners to gather more information. So again, a shift from what do I have to offer to what is your work like? What do you see? What are the gaps and opportunities? So that both of the partners in this case were able to really develop a much richer sense of one another's perspectives, which in turn enabled them to develop solutions that were addressing the holistic, comprehensive needs of survivors at the systems level. Similarly, the Texas Council along the way noted that one quote that we have from them is, the more we look to see what resources were available to our programs and survivors, the more resources that we found we were not aware of previously. And that is coming, from a state coalition that was steeped in this work. So really this principle being the need to gain much more perspective from our partners rather than sort of assuming that we have the knowledge and plugging ourselves in, really developing a much richer sense and then collaboratively developing solutions. I think I just heard someone wanting to pipe in. No? Okay. So I thought that we could, participants, if you're interested, and you can either do this sort of rhetorically yourselves, or if you want to use the chat, feel free to do that. So applying this idea of information gathering before developing solutions and gaining perspective, we pose a couple of questions. First, who are potential partners that you envision yourself working with within your community, and how might you gain a richer understanding of their perspective in order to enrich the partnership? If folks want to type in on that, and if panelists have anything that they want to contribute from their own experience around this idea, feel free.
And while we do that, we actually have Sarah Schoner on the line. So Sarah, I'm going to unmute you, and if it might be good to get some of your reflections on this while folks are answering these questions. Are you there?
I am.
Hi.
Hi. I think I see some stuff coming in on the chat, so I'll take a back seat until other people get a chance to pipe in.
Great. Okay. All right, so if folks want to do a little bit of reflection on their own about sort of gaining richer understanding of perspectives of potential partners, feel free to provide anything that you may already be doing or other ideas for the future. I think we're going to hop to the next idea. So the second promising practice that the report highlights is the idea of setting manageable and flexible goals. And really this piece centered around just the principle that sometimes many of the pilot sites may have began with an idea of how to approach a problem, and as Jamie just mentioned before, as they dug deeper into their work, either the information that they were receiving made them engage in a different way of addressing the problem, or sometimes things happened within their community or within their organization that may have required, actually, that they shift resources. So an example of that that we note in the report is that while the Women's Resource Center sort of began convening their economic advocacy working group, there were some unanticipated developments within their community that demanded that resources be devoted in other directions. So they sort of shifted from this working group idea that they had had at one point and sort of put that on hold and shifted their resources to doing some more systems advocacy and community organizing work. Similarly, one of the other pilots that we were working with, dealt with the challenge that many of the students that they were working with in a clinic, in order for them to effectively use a tool that they were planning on developing, they really needed to have a better appreciation for the philosophy underlying survivor-centered economic advocacy. So they had to shift their strategy as well. Another principle that, so again, some thoughts for folks to kind of chew on as a way of internalizing this second principle. Just, first of all, articulating a possible goal for your organization and then the challenges around it and what steps might you take to ensure that the stakeholders are grounded in a common philosophy to address that goal. That critical underlying understanding really being something that we saw as necessary to folks being able to effectively partner. And if folks want to chat in their responses around this, feel free. Then there were another set of promising practices that we feature in the book, really focus upon the idea of partnership and collaboration in particular. And the first of those that we identify is that it's really critical to match the size and strength of the network to your intended goals. So we found that advocates were really most successful when they deliberately chose partners that had robust access to people and information that was required for the implementation of their projects. So it's a resource question, right? Thinking carefully about who those players are going to be within your community or within your organization or your state, and trying to make sure that the assets match the goal. So again, the questions here might be, what is the scope of my project? And what partners have access to the people and information that I need in order to implement the project? So being really strategic about allocating those resources, identifying and allocating them. And then another, again, another practice relates, yeah, please.
Sorry, this is Sarah. I have to give some examples because this was one of my favorite little lessons that we learned, and I think specifically about how the Texas and the tax clinic kind of flipped their perspectives on the type of work that they were going to be doing. So I remember Krista saying to me, we thought we were going to jump right in and start doing work on the ground level and providing economic advocacy to survivors right off the bat. And then realized once they got in that a step that they had to take first was really understanding what resources were already available, what kind of work was already being done across the state. And, we saw all of those great experts and partners that they made because of doing that. And so really, they went from looking at the very granular level in direct service and decided that they needed to step back first and work on a more systemic level. Whereas Jamie, I remember originally thought the approach was going to be building a larger state-level network of tax attorneys and DV advocates, and found it really challenging to break into the DV advocacy community, and ended up realizing that the best way to start was to be building individual relationships with individual practitioners and working directly with survivors and building trust that way, and building the network out from there. So starting really broadly and focusing in ended up being what worked best for them. And so, it made me realize that there's no one right way, and that what it takes is really keeping one's ear to the ground and figuring out how partnership building is going to work best in their own communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And also sort of goes back to the first idea of having to be flexible, right, around these principles too. So around goals, rather. Okay, so I'm just going to breeze over the next two, and then I want to make sure that Denver Law School provides its current perspective on its current work. So the two other pieces that we highlighted in this section were around ensuring a solid foundation, really taking inventory of the resources available, and making sure that you have the infrastructure in place. And I just want to highlight that CSAJ has a organizational assessment tool that you can find on our website that is really tailored to help folks in doing that kind of readiness work. And then the last principle is around creating partnerships rather than referral systems. And by that we mean, again, really trying to make sure that people are thinking broadly about how their work can be coordinated as opposed to just handing off work to folks with other expertise. Okay, you can read a lot more about these and think a lot more about them later, so I want to make sure that we turn to our current demonstration site work. And I'm going to hand it over. This gives you an overview of how we are envisioning this work carrying out over the next year or so. And we're currently really deep into the assessment phase of things. Sarah, I don't know if you want to speak to that before we pass it over to Tammy.
Yeah, I'm happy to set the stage a little bit. And I think that the pilot site actually really set the stage. You can tell that through their work in using the model of building partnerships really gave them, enhanced their capacity to continue in this work and think about it in a multi-level capacity, which is sort of the focus of this next phase of work. So to do so, and after all of the build-up and the work that they've done since 2012, what we're doing now is really taking them through the process where they analyze their internal capacities and resources, and then do that same thing to look at their communities, since they all come from such unique contexts, to really map out all of the potential possibilities in terms of projects and priorities that would move and enhance economic security. And we're really focused on both the individual advocacy and legal service changes and a little more deliberately how systems change work can help in that. So given that work that they'll do and kind of wrap up here at the end of the summer, they'll prioritize that map, so to speak, into a strategic plan, galvanize all their partners, and implement, and then help us figure out how organizations in different contexts with different partners and working on different levels can really evaluate that work. So that's where the work is going right now. So I'm going to introduce Tammy, who is the director there at the University of Denver of the Civil Litigation Clinic, to kind of talk about stepping into the demonstration site work at this level. Tammy, are you still with us?
Yep, I am. Thank you. So my name is Tammy Kennan, and I teach a clinic at the Storm College of Law at the University of Denver. And what I do in particular is I supervise 16 students per semester who are actually representing low-income clients, and we do that in civil matters, including domestic violence protection orders, eviction from subsidized housing, and recovery of stolen wages for low-income workers. And even as I say that, and as I've been thinking here today and listening to these great panelists talk, I have been thinking to myself about how even in my own clinic and in my own teaching, I don't do a very good job of breaking down the silos between those three areas of law. And so I feel like already it's just exciting to be at the very start of this project and to be listening to people talk about their experience and to share it with us. And it just puts so many different ideas in my head. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is that had I not started working with CSAJ and taking advantage of this project and also thinking more deliberately about economic justice, I wouldn't have looked to a lot of the work I'm already doing and the resources I already have access to as places to tap into and as sites of transformative change, possibly. So it's just super exciting. My clinic is housed literally within the law school at DU, and I think that's really unique for a functioning law firm to exist within an educational institution, and for a supervising attorney to also be a tenured faculty member, and for law students to be actually sworn into the practice of law while they're enrolled in both the clinic and in other classes. And it's also unique that DU has a very strong public interest in experiential learning foci for its students, and that the law school itself is housed on a campus of a larger university. So there are a number of graduate programs like social work and forensic psych and business grad programs, a number of undergraduate majors, including community development, economics, and women's studies, and a university in its own right that considers itself to be very public service-oriented. And again, I bring all of that up because we've been talking so much about how our own particular contexts are so important to the work and sort of thinking about what directions we want to go in. And to be honest, I hadn't really thought enough about all of the resources that I have available. And I know that's been a little bit of a theme today, but I just want to say how much it's really resonated for me as I've begun to do this work. So at a global level, the goal of the work, and this is very global, to increase survivor access to consumer and economic security by mapping survivor and community needs and then implementing strategies to address those needs, grounded in the lived realities of survivors. So that's very global. And I can't exactly get into the nitty-gritty, and I think that I shouldn't be yet, what the less global needs or the less global goals are going to be. But I would say this, that even in the work that I've done thus far, and really have only been doing the work for a couple of months now, that at a less global level, a little bit more specificity includes identifying stakeholders, trying to map sort of what is out there in terms of knowledge and resources and where the gaps are. Creating a network is a less global but still a large goal. Creating a network and building collaboration and relationships. And ultimately, to provide comprehensive services, not just legal but non-legal, with partners that more effectively and holistically help survivors solve problems. One way that we've begun trying to assess what the needs and the gaps are, and the strengths actually, is by doing what's called a SWOT analysis. And this is a survey that CSAJ helped, or I should say developed in collaboration with me, to assess different players' strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And with this survey, the very first thing that we did was I filled it out. I assessed strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within my own clinic and the law school and the university more largely. And that was an incredibly useful thing to do. And I would recommend, and maybe Erica and Sarah, you can talk about this in a minute, if that tool is available to people or could be made available widely. That actually was quite eye-opening and really helped me both identify some of the resources that I mentioned already at the law school and the university, but also it really helped me pinpoint where it is that I need to educate myself more and where I see, I guess, just very exciting opportunities to collaborate. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. In addition to myself doing it, what we did is we started by asking 8 or 9 DV and sexual assault service providers in the community to fill it out. And these are largely people who I have relationships with and know pretty well. And we did this as a first phase so that we could get answers and then tweak the survey if we felt as though the answers weren't specific enough, or maybe there were certain areas where we wanted more information. Some of the themes, though, from just our preliminary survey include these, and I'm just going to mention a few, just a handful. A real desire by people, by service providers, to provide holistic services rather than the limited services that maybe their mission statement or their grant funding requires of them, but also a fear of capacities to do so. Also a desire for training and cross-training, and in particular some sort of training module for advocates regarding economic issues in particular. They identified feeling less aware of important debt, credit, identity theft, rights of survivors to family assets, to relocation funds, and other emergency funds. And it was great to just get that level of specificity with regard to what they wanted training on. There was mentioned in a little bit of the feedback, a desire for corporate partnerships. That's something I could not have identified in any universe on my own without having done a survey. Desire for long-term solutions for economic issues. And then some of the strengths that were identified were, and this was just wonderful to see, this real commitment in the advocacy community that I get the sense after having gone to the statewide, the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault joint conference just last week, that there's this very, very deeply held statewide commitment in advocacy to be survivor-centered and to respect autonomy. And so we want to use all of these things, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as we move forward in planning. So some of the next steps that I'm thinking about, I guess first, and I mentioned this, but just really educating myself more on what it is that economic security and economic justice mean, beyond just some of the sort of knee-jerk ideas that come up. So that's number one. Second, thinking expansively about this unique organizational setting that I'm in. I don't know how many other participants on the webinar today are necessarily in academia or are teaching at a law school, but the point being that each of us really brings with our context very unique, I think, opportunities that I really, as I mentioned, had just not thought of earlier. And Sarah and Erica have been doing a great job of helping me think about what the idiosyncrasies, but strengths and capacities are that a large academic institution provides, like the possibility of doing interdisciplinary work, the possibility of collaborating with researchers, the notion that academic institutions host conferences and symposia. The law school might host CLEs for other attorneys, that an academic institution has resources that it can use and actual locale, large forums for people to gather. And again, I've learned a lot about these resources in particular because of the decision to try to focus on economic justice issues. I think also in more nitty-gritty terms, I think that continuing to map the area of capacities, needs, and stakeholders in the community is going to be a big next step. Lots of additional domestic violence and sex assault providers across the state need to be surveyed. Are already existing partners, but not necessarily partners in the domestic violence sexual assault world, but partners in the areas of housing and worker issues and immigrant issues need to be surveyed. All of the partners who are collaborating with Denver's new but not yet open Family Justice Center, other university faculty in different departments at DU, and of course survivors themselves. And I feel as though some of the things I've seen today have really helped me think about how it is I would reach out to survivors themselves. That may include a survey or may include something altogether different, like individual meetings or weekly meetings or meetings in which economic and housing issues are the focus. I think more globally, I've been thinking about how it is that in terms of future directions, I'm going to combine my primary mission, which is to educate students, to teach students how to be how to practice at a very high level, and how to provide holistic and very client-centered services. How am I going to teach them about economic justice? And in the process of thinking about this, you know, really sort of brainstorming with them and experimenting with ways that good attorneys work in the community and in collaboration with partners and don't work in silos, as we've seen people both comment on and talk about today. And to help them understand the importance of building relationships to the practice of law. And then, I guess more specifically, thinking about in their individual representation, how am I going to teach them to actually ask clients the questions that they need to ask to really get at the economic issues, which I have to say, again, in reflection, which I've been doing a lot of lately, I haven't really taught students to do that as well as I could. So I'm thinking about all of those types of things, and I guess what I would end with in terms of future directions is stating that I'm feeling very aware of trying not to be in a rush to make too many decisions too quickly about our directions, except I guess the one exception I would say to that is the understanding that I think that the building of relationships is going to be key and it's going to underlie everything I do and everything that the students do. But aside from that, trying not to really rush into anything and to remember what people have stated already, which is that this is a process, that the process even of identifying the partners and figuring out in collaboration with them what our future direction will be is something that will be organic and that I hope to reflect upon and to really remember, I think Jamie put it really well, that the path to the goal isn't going to be straight. So that's kind of where I'm at so far.
Thank you so much, Tammy. That was a great way to tie things together and move us forward. Before I let Erica move it on, I just want to make a couple notes, particularly number one, that I know we're at time. So I do want to allow anyone who needs to go to feel free to drop off. If you can stay, we are going to get a little more feedback from all the sites and try to answer a few questions. And then second, I just want to clarify one thing that Tammy brought up in terms of the process and for all of your information regarding the SWOT. CSAJ in no way invented that. Many of you have probably done a SWOT analysis in strategic planning or other things, and because of that, it was very well suited to help guide both the internal and some external assessment work. And all of that work as it comes online, we will absolutely start making available in tools that will be useful. So with that, I know that Erica wanted to kind of get some of the reflections of the other sites on where they are right now, and then we'll end with a little bit of discussion. So Erica.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tammy, for that really rich and thoughtful explanation of your thinking and work. And I'm going to just add to Sarah's very humble comment about this. While it is true that the SWOT analysis is out there, Sarah has done an unbelievable amount of work on developing surveys that really help people delve further into their thinking around that, and so some of those tools have been developed by CSAJ and I think could potentially be useful to folks. So what I think might be nice to hear at this point is to go back to the Texas Council and the Women's Resource Center and Indiana Legal Services, and if you folks wouldn't mind answering these questions about future steps in this next phase. So why don't we go in the order that we were in before. So what questions are driving your next phase of the work, and what do you envision as your future directions? Krista and Mona.
Hi again, this is Krista Delgado. In terms of the questions that are driving our work moving forward, I think that we did a good amount of work on understanding what resources exist in terms of consumer legal services and in building our own knowledge base, which both of those things are absolutely ongoing activities that you never know everything there is to know about consumer law or credit issues, and you never know everybody that you probably should know. So definitely continuing that, but also trying to understand where we can have the most impact and where we're the most effective and useful to our advocates and to survivors in Texas are really the questions that I think are driving our work. And from our very specific role as the state coalition. So in terms of the function that we have, how can we be the most strategic and really impact our programs in a way that they have sort of noted they need some type of help and assistance. And to that end, we're not putting down the consumer legal services work. We're sort of holding that up, and that'll be an ongoing piece, but we're going to go more specific into housing issues because right now we have just noted that that is such a prime spot for advocacy, both at the federal level in terms of the implementation of the Violence Against Women Act and expanding that to many new covered programs, and what that means in terms of the needed advocacy at the state level with our public housing authorities, but also with the HERS Act and how it's really restructured the priorities at the federal level and among states in terms of rapid rehousing as opposed to, thinking about shelter and transitional housing as the primary uses of certain the funding and way of thinking. So we really feel like we need to be on top of that as much as possible and to make sure that we are in the conversations that are taking place around these critical housing resources so that survivors' voices are in that mix too amongst other homeless and affordable housing groups. So, and from a statewide coalition perspective, that's a very natural fit in terms of function for us to engage in that level of policy and systems advocacy.
Great, great. Yeah, we are looking forward to that next phase. Okay, let's turn to the Women's Resource Center. What are you envisioning as your next steps?
I'm going to be brief. So the questions that continue to drive us is similar to what Krista was saying, is to continue to evaluate what are the economic priorities of survivors coming to our organization. And Sarah, as you spoke about already, has developed a SWOT for us that we are using with our staff, with the women we serve, and also we're about to launch into using it with community partners. What we're looking for, what our dream is, what we're hoping to develop in the not too far off future is some type of a community coalition for the advancement of women and survivors' economic well-being. There's a couple of groups within our community that have already showed some interest in that arena, one of which is the United Way, and we also have a women's philanthropist group in our community that we think might make some good partners. We envision growing too, growing the work. And I think that my experience is telling me that funders want to invest in organizations or projects or ideas that have a return, if you will, that take it someplace further. And I think that this work, this economic justice work, is a very type of hopeful work that can take women's lives and survivors' lives to a new level. And the whole concept, I think, of having a more independent life is a very attractive thing. And to assist people in becoming independent is a very attractive thing for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Thank you for highlighting that funding piece and sort of that paradigm piece. That's really, we have not talked about that explicitly yet, and that's really helpful to think about. Jamie with Indiana Legal Services, what are your next steps or thinking about your next steps?
Well, the question that's kind of propelling us forward is still trying to answer, you know, where the tax services we offer best fit in with the DV programs, and, you know, what we can do to sort of have the biggest impact. And so some of our future activities or anticipated activities are designed, I think, to address that question. We're working on developing a tax-specific survey for our community partners and the survivors that they serve, and creating a tax checklist for family law attorneys that they can use. We have sort of focused on family law attorneys, but going forward we are hoping to engage and train tax attorneys on DV issues. Working with the Law School Protective Order Project to help us to sort of expand the kind of the awareness of tax issues for survivors among attorneys and the advocates, and so connecting with the Protective Order Project to help us do that. And then just, you know, kind of ongoing outreach and education, looking sort of for the best place to raise awareness and of and demystify the tax issues that are faced by survivors.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you. We've got a lot of exciting work ahead, as you can hear. We are, it seems to me like we're at the way beyond our time, but I wanted to just make clear to everybody on this call that, you know, this is work that we're steeped in and interested in, you know, being a resource for all of you on. So if you are interested in doing some of this work within your own organization, within your own state and your community, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we can certainly connect you with the folks who you've heard from today, as well as think with you about how your particular context might shape things. So here's all of our website and our email information. There's some more information on this PowerPoint that you can check out, but we also, some folks in the chat during the course of today's webinar talked a little bit about policy, trying to identify systemic barriers and make some policy changes. So CSAJ is also available and interested in being supportive of that type of work. These are some resources that have been referenced throughout the course of today's call: the needs assessment report, an article about the economic ripple effects, CSAJ's pilot report, of course, and also the assessment tool for lawyers, advocates, and programs. And I just want to say thank you so much to all the participants, and also to each of the panelists today for contributing your insights and expertise that you've gathered over the course of the past couple of years. It really is very enriching, and I'm thankful for your willingness to share it with all of us.
Same, just want to echo that, and I know we didn't have a lot of time for deep discussion, but there were great comments and questions, so feel free to pass them on, and we'll make sure to answer them and connect you with folks that you need connecting with, and thinking with you also, as Erica mentioned. So from Sarah, we thank you very much, and thank you so much to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.